You can bring your food inside also. Please make your way inside. I want to welcome you all to CAMPSSAH's first in-person event for, gosh, 2 years, 3 maybe. CAMPSSAH is the Center for the Advancement of Multicultural Perspectives in the Social Sciences, Arts, and Humanities. And part of its mission is to support scholars whose work supports and advances the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have about 17 scholars who are affiliated with CAMPSSAH, and they come from across the campus, across the university, from Letters and Science to School of Education, to the School of Law, and to the Graduate School of Management. So today's event is to amplify and celebrate the publication of Juan Diego Díaz's first book, Africanness in Action, Essentialism and Musical Imaginations of Africa in Brazil. So we have a lot of really exciting things planned. We're going to start with the UC Davis Samba School, led by Brian Rice. And I'm going to give a brief bio of Brian, and then they're going to come in and play for us. Brian Rice is a lecturer in music and the director of Samba and Afro-Cuban percussion at UC Davis. Brian is a highly acclaimed performer, educator, and recording artist, and one of the most versatile percussionists in the Bay Area. Though he is best known as a specialist in Brazilian and Cuban music, he can be heard playing a multitude of styles, and his percussion playing has been a part of over 60 recordings. Brian Rice received his Bachelor of Music from the Oberlin Conservatory of Music in Percussion Performance and Ethnomusicology, and he has been a freelance musician since 1989, founding the Bateria Samba Seattle and the Afro-Cuban Folkloric Collective. He has traveled to both Cuba and Brazil for musical studies. Brian teaches privately and conducts workshops in the Bay Area and has taught at many schools and camps. He currently performs with the Berkeley Choro Ensemble and Wake the Dead. That was amazing. I wanted to dance, but then I didn't know whether that was appropriate, so. Thank you. Awesome. Next, I want to invite Professor Diaz up with his capoeiristas, and they will perform for you. And I failed to introduce myself, I realized. My name is Kimberly Nettles-Barcelón. I'm the faculty director for CAMPSSAH, and I'm also an associate professor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies.
We have a combination of students who are currently taking the ensemble, who are encountering capoeira for the first time, and we also have in the group people who have been practicing for years and years. And but capoeira is a very, very participatory kind of practice that allows the interaction of people who have very different levels of skill and experience. So this will be a demonstration of that. We're going to give you a little taste of a capoeira performance looks like. It involves songs in Portuguese. It involves a kind of physical action in the center of a circle that is usually formed by, is usually not always formed by practitioners. And that physical action involves movements that sometimes resemble dance, sometimes resemble martial arts. There are acrobatics and things like that, so it's a complicated way of interacting with the body, but a very rich one too. There are instruments that belong to the Afro-Brazilian musical tradition, which is precisely the topic of my book, so it's most appropriate in that sense. It is hard to perform after such a wonderful performance of Carnival Samba, but we'll do our best. performance, we go for hours and hours doing this, and people come and go. It's a very participatory kind of performance. Many times, onlookers or bypassers, they get excited and they get in the center of the circle or grab an instrument or clap. So it's a very, very participatory, again, kind of performance. So thank you so much. So we're going to take the instruments away, and then I'll catch my breath and start talking about that book over there.
I want to remind you that, is this still on? I want to remind you that there's food outside, so please help yourself. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to do a more formal introduction. I just wanted to say one thing. Another note, the book, Africanness in Action, is for sale in the back of the room. The bookstore is selling it. And there will be a raffle also at the end of the event. We're raffling off one of the books. Done? It's ready? Welcome back. I want to take a moment and introduce our main event, our speaker. Professor Juan Diego Díaz is an ethnomusicologist, I hear myself, with a geographic research interest in Africa and its diaspora, particularly Brazil and West Africa. He explores how African diasporic music circulates and transforms across the Atlantic, and how they serve individuals and communities in identity formation. Juan Diego earned his PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of British Columbia. He joined UC Davis and the CAMPSSAH community as part of the inaugural cohort of CAMPSSAH in 2019. Previous to teaching at UC Davis, Juan Diego held posts as a lecturer at the University of Ghana and postdoctoral fellow at the University of Essex, where he investigated the music of descendants of freed enslaved Africans who resettled from Brazil to Ghana, Togo, and Benin during the 19th century. His book, Africanness in Action, Essentialism and Musical Imaginations of Africa in Brazil, was published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Let me note that this event is also part of the Principles of Community, which is opening this week. And we have received support from the Office of Academic Diversity and Diversity, Equity and Inclusion under VC Tall and AVC Lorena Orepeza. This event was put together lovingly by Rosa Denise and Thomas O'Donnell. And we're so glad to have you here and to have Juan Diego here to tell us more about his really wonderful and fascinating research. Thank you, Juan.
So thank you very much for that generous introduction, Kimberly, and also thank you to all the CAMPSSAH and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team for organizing this event and for just making a big deal out of this publication of this book. I'm also grateful to all the performers. It is really, this book is about music and my research is about music, so it's just wonderful to, oh, there is a feedback, that's okay. So, so it is really important that we are in touch with music, and that's really an important part of what I see we do at the music department, that we put students in touch with music. No matter how intellectual the things we say about it, we are in touch with the substance, and this book is really about that. That's one of my main goals. So I prepared some slides for you to walk you through sort of the intellectual process behind the book. Not too much. I won't bore you too much with that, but I will present the kind of the intellectual debates and the scholars that are part of that I'm part of. Oh. Is that better? I'm terrible with microphones. Can you hear me? Yes. Great. Más recio, like that. Great. Okay. So I will introduce the scholarship that this book is trying to join and the kinds of contributions I'm trying to make. I will also present some maps to locate geographically what the parts where I did research, and then I will share some videos of the groups that I studied, which is the most important part, the interactions with the musicians. And then I will show a couple of examples of the kinds of analysis the kinds of things that I was interested in my analysis when I engaged in the music of these different groups. So, let me see. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge this man, Maestro Lechieres Leiche. He's the most important interlocutor I've had in Brazil for this book, at least for this book. He passed away last year, he succumbed to COVID-19. He was vaccinated, but he had an asthmatic condition, and so he couldn't survive. But he was a wonderful, wonderful person, an incredible and very generous collaborator, a person who reshaped, in my view, the soundscape of Brazil, of this country, and his absence is deeply felt, both by musicians, his friends and family, and also us who are interested in Brazilian music in general. So that's Maestro Lecheres Leche. Now, when my book started literally with this question: what is African about African music? Or about African music and about African diasporic music. And so if I ask you what images or sounds come to mind when I ask this question, please feel free to fill in. Drums, percussion, yes, perhaps dance and rhythms and things like that, right? So I asked this question to many people in Brazil and also when I lived in West Africa. What do you consider to be the core characteristics of this music that make it African, or that give it that Afro characteristic? And these ideas kept coming back over and over, that the music is particularly rhythmic, that rhythm is the most important dimension, or that the music is rhythmically complex. And really when I started to ask more questions, this boiled down to the idea that the music is polyrhythmic and is very complex. It's the way in which those rhythms are put together. So there's an idea that is rhythmic, and there's this density in rhythms that makes it complex. The second one, which I have called, these are my labels. This is not how normal people talk about music. These are my terms. So the second is percussiveness. It's precisely the idea that drums and percussion instruments are the most important instruments that are used in this kind of the kinds of musics. And an alternative way of seeing that percussiveness is that if non-percussive instruments are played, they are played in a percussive way. Right? So the idea that percussiveness is so important that even comes through when you're playing a trumpet, or you're playing the piano, or you're playing flute, or anything, or even singing. It's essentially percussive music. The third one is embodiment. The idea that this music is meant to be danced, is meant to be felt with the body, as opposed to enjoy it intellectually, to kind of contemplate with the mind, merely with the mind. Another one is spirituality, the idea that this music is always connected to some kind of spirituality, and this comes from a broader idea that in African and African diasporic culture, there's no separation between the sacred and the secular, that there's a continuity between these two dimensions. And this is often opposed to the idea that in the West there is a clear-cut separation between those two things. Yeah. The fifth is spontaneity and improvisation. This is self-explanatory. African musics are imagined as being musics that are played spontaneously, that there's a lot of improvisation, that there are no rigid formal structures that govern it, but musicians do more or less whatever they want within style, and that is fine. Yeah? And the last one is collectivism. The last one of this list, anyway, is collectivism, the idea that music is participatory, that is communal, and this is, of course, opposed to the idea of Western individualism. So you may be thinking of examples of African and African diasporic genres that do not really fit these features, these characteristics. And so we all do, and
so how do we make sense of those? How do we explain? Are those less African kinds of music? So I had many conversations with musicians about these kinds of this problem that emerges when we treat African music through the lens of these terms that many people have called Africanisms. Now, there is each of these terms, and I have hinted at that, they have their counterpart in a binary way of thinking, where rhythmicity, for example, opposes melodicity and harmonicity. So the musics from Africa and the African diaspora are rhythmic, whereas musics from the West are rhythmically uncomplicated, but melodically and harmonically elaborate, complex, right? So that's the binary right there. And each of those six, I won't go through each of those, but you can see how there's a correspondence. Yeah, there's a binary that is formed with those. And this is a binary that has been recognized by many. I'm not the first to really say this, that these are problematic binaries that have been used by scholars, by social commentators, by people in general, to emphasize a difference between the West and between Africa and its diaspora. Right? Now, this question that I have asked, what is African about African diasporic music, is a question that has been asked since at least the beginning of the 20th century in Anglophone scholarship. So in that sense, my book is part of this genealogy, this lineage of people who have been thinking about this. And I'm bringing three books here that are, have really dealt with this question in a very explicit manner and that have been very influential in Anglophone scholarship. The first one is The Negro Family. So The Negro Family. The second one is the Myth of the Negro Past, and the last one is the African American Culture by Vincent Price. So these three books have three different takes on what is that African thing that was retained, that still exists in the Americas. So these books were written from the perspective, like mine, from the diaspora. In their case, from the African American diaspora. So the first one, the Negro Family, postulated that Africans and their descendants, due to the traumatic experience of slavery, lost their culture. And what they were doing that seemed different to what Westerns were doing was a mere imitation, a pale imitation of the models that they were copying from European music. Yeah. So so this is look at the date, 1939. So now these are ideas that we consider dated, and then more or less in the same time, Melville Herzkovitz, who's a very important figure in African American studies, wrote this book to basically refute this point. And he wrote an entire book about Africanisms and pointed to different practices, different characteristics that he thought were retained by African Americans and by African diasporic people across the Americas. So he basically claimed that regardless of that experience of enslavement and of the geographical and also historical separation from Africa, these black people, these African descendants, retained something that was essential to their culture. And so he was very celebrated. And what is really ironic is that the person who was defending the loss of culture theory was actually a black person, a black scholar. And the person who was defending the Africanisms theory was Melville Herzkovitz, a white Euro-American scholar. And then years later, Mintz and Price wrote this very, very influential book where they criticized Herzkovitz for being too broad in his assumption that those things that were retained just survived in such a literal manner. They say there's a lot of creolization here. There are many local histories that explain all that difference. So we can't talk really about the survival of African traits in the Americas. We should talk about creolization, about this hybridity. So this book is part of this debate that's been going on for almost a century in Anglophone scholarship, and so you'll see what my position is with that. So I'm gonna bring in a couple of extra scholars that have been really influential for me. When I was a grad student at UBC, I read their books and I was really taken by the ideas, and they really pushed me in certain directions. I ended up writing my dissertation, drawing on their work significantly, and then for my book I continue to do so in different ways. So the first one is Representing African Music. This book was written by a Ghanaian musicologist who basically criticized, scolded, some of us would say, scolded European and American and North American scholars for essentializing African music, for reducing African music to African rhythm. And he went through the writings of scholars from the end of the 19th century all the way to the time when he published the book in 2003, explaining how people have selectively have hand-picked examples to emphasize the idea that African music are actually rhythmically rich and melodically and harmonically poor. And he says that is a way of essentialization that has been used, and then he takes a step back and makes this bigger point that this is part of a larger ideology of difference that is being used in a veiled way to justify European colonialism and even slavery before, to create this idea that you guys are different, you are rhythmic, and being rhythmic also means being primitive, being a person who reacts to music in an unmediated way. Yeah, so you're more on the nature side of the nature-culture binary, right? So he calls to these ideologies of difference, and he invites scholars to study difference. Yes, there's a study difference, but start from the assumption of sameness. He says, why do we have to study African music assuming that it is inherently different to its so-called nemesis, the Western music? He said, let's start from the assumption that they have the same values and that they are equally sophisticated, they are equally rhythmic, harmonic, melodic, and so on. And then let's find the difference. But let's find it. Let's not assume that the difference is there. So that really set me on a path. That really made an impression and it still does. So thank you, Kofi Agawu. Now another important book that influenced my thought. I hope I'm not boring you too much with this sort of a theoretical background. Is this book by Paul Gilroy, British Caribbean scholar, who wrote this quite famous book. It's called The Black Atlantic, and where at certain point, so this book it treats the African diaspora and African music as a unit. He says there is this idea that diasporas function with a motherland at one point and other people at other places longing to go back to that homeland and taking elements from that place, taking features and and practices and elements from that homeland to maintain their diasporic culture, this doesn't really work. So he treats what he calls the Black Atlantic as a network of points where knowledge and practices circulate in a horizontal way. So in that sense, places in the diaspora can have the same perceived authenticity and Africanness as places in Africa itself. And that's actually one of the cases that I will share with you in a second. And in discussing that, he explains that people who have studied black music, oh, I did something wrong here. It's still showing there. So he proposed that people who have studied black culture and African diasporic culture have taken he summarizes three different approaches. The first, he calls it the essentialist approach. It's the approach that assumes that there is some kind of essence, and that essence is precisely that, is something that cannot be replaced, cannot be changed, because if you change it, you're going to lose that African quality. For example, if you remove the polyrhythms, then you don't have Africanness, because those polyrhythms are part of that essence. So I'm seeing myself. I mean, I like myself, but not that much. So if you can. Great, thank you. So that's the essentialist approach. Now the second one is what he called the anti-essentialist approach. So this is social constructivism, the assumption that everything in culture is a social construction. It's something that we have created. They are basically myths that we are happy to live with. Yeah? And then he says, these two approaches have their merit, but they both fall short in explaining what actually happens on the ground. And he proposes this very, very clumsy term called anti-essentialism. And by that he means an approach where we are anti-essentialist. So we recognize that essentialism is a social construction. So there is that aspect there, but we at the same time recognize that essentialism has a value for practitioners. It has a value for practitioners. And when we as social scientists, researchers, humanists go and we deny or we try to pull the curtain from this essentialism and try to reveal that this is really what it is, we are actually committing an act of intellectual violence. We should acknowledge the power that essentialisms have in people in using it to fight their battles. Yeah, so there's a very, very interesting related concept by an Indian scholar called Gayatri Spivak, called strategic essentialism. Strategic essentialism. This is the idea that people who are essentialized, they used those essentialisms to their favor. They embrace them, they reproduce them, but because there's some kind of gain for them, right? So that's one interesting idea. So that's what's useful for me. But I think that the idea of anti-essentialism of Paul Gilroy is broader, and I'll explain in a second how that was useful for me. So in my book, I embraced this anti-essentialist approach of Paul Gilroy. So I'm aware that that's a very, very complicated, it's like a meta-narrative on essentialism, but I hope that the point comes across from this talk and when you read this book. So let me see. Here I have a quote that I pulled from Black Panther, from an analysis of Black Panther that was published in 2018, that really shows how essentialist ideas are powerful for people. So the quotes go: Wakanda, I assume most people have watched Wakanda. If you have not, you need to watch that movie. It's really important. So Wakanda functions as a place for multiple generations of Black Americans to store some of our most deeply held aspirations. We have for centuries sought to either find or create a promised land where we would be untroubled by the criminal horrors of our American existence. Never mind that most of us had never been to Africa. The point was not verisimilitude or a precise accounting of Africa's reality. It was the envisioning of a free self, right? So this, I discussed this in the context of talking how the movie, in some ways, perpetuates some of these tropes about what Africa is. So you see, these tribal fights to death for the throne. You see, while they are having there's two, I forgot the names, Chala and Killmonger, they're having this fight to death. There are drummers, semi-naked, playing. There's also a moment where Chala goes into this dreamlike, this trance, drinks something that takes this person to this trance-like moment where he connects with the ancestors and receives this wisdom to come and be able to rule his people. So all these tropes about ancestry, about the body, about percussiveness are reified there. But at the same time, Wakanda is a super advanced society, technologically speaking, with spaceships and technologies that the West envies, right? So that trumps the trope of African primitivism, yeah? And it's connected with, of course, with ideas of Afrofuturism that we know have been also used in music by people like Sun Ra and George Clinton. So important. So I hope this really drives home that point of how important these essentialisms are for people. People may self-essentialize because that may be empowering for them, not just to get to materially because they apply to a grant and they're going to get some actual money or resources for something, but it could also be something more in terms of dignity. All right, so what I propose is to move from these ideas of Africanisms, of these essentialized ideas, of thinking of them as African survivals and look at them as tropes of Africanness, as trope of African. And I'm using a particular definition of trope in which tropes that coexist in two interrelated realms. First, in the realm of discourse, and second, in the realm of practice. So here we are hitting head-on that really, really fraught relationship between discourse and practice. All of us who have done ethnography all of us who are alive understand that when many times what we do doesn't match what we say, right? So when I in all these years I've been speaking with the musicians, asking them, so what do you mean this piece is African? Oh no, this compositional technique here and these instruments and whatnot. And then when I go and analyze the repertoire, I find all these inconsistencies. I go back and ask again, and then I get a slightly different answer, or the people doing some gymnastics to justify the decision. So we could, one simplistic and I think unproductive way to treat those inconsistencies between discourse and practice would be to say, oh, people just don't know. I as the interpreter need to step in and put order to this mess, right? So that's, fortunately, we've moved away from that approach. You should answer that. And now we are thinking of ways in which you look at what is exactly what this person mean when they are saying that their music is eminently rhythmic, and when we actually see is that there is a lot of, the melodic treatment is very complex, for example. So what is really behind that? So what I'm my formulation for the treatment of these essentialisms, which is really the contribution of the book, is a way to look at them as that dance, that very, very fraught dance between practice and discourse. I had conversations with people, I asked their audiences what they think about that, and then I go deep into the music and try to figure out, and to the performance practices as well, and try to make sense of those connections between those two things. Two premises that guided me throughout were, first, that agency and meaning can only be found at the crossroads of discourse and practice. Not just by speaking with people we can find the treasure, so to speak. We need to look at them, and just by looking at the sounds themselves, we cannot. We need to find, to embrace that gray area, that complex space where discourse and practice are rubbing against each other. And second is that the truth is held by practitioners. It's held by practitioners, even if we as researchers don't have the capacity in the moment to understand what they're trying to communicate to us, we shouldn't assume that we are the ones who hold the truth. The truth is in the practitioners themselves. It is our task to follow them. So this book is not about all these people that I presented here. That's counterintuitive. I wanted to show you where my theoretical framework is, but this book is about practitioners. So when you look into the analytical part of the book, you will only hear the voices of the musicians, and from time to time my voice trying to make sense of being immersed in their world. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of maps here to help you, to help us geographically know where we are. So this is a map of the African diaspora. I use this a lot to teach my students when I talk about music from Latin America or the African continent and the circulation of music between those two places. So the arrows show the direction of movements during the infamous period of the transatlantic slave trade, which started more or less at the beginning of the 1500s and ended at the mid of the 19th century, roughly 3.5 centuries. Approximately 12.8 million people were captured, enslaved, and sent over to the America. 12.5, I mean. Those are the best estimates we have. And of those, just a little less than 5 million arrived to Brazil. That's the colony that received most people from the African continent. And just to give you a little bit of context, this country received about 400,000 versus nearly 5 million in Brazil. So just get a sense of the importance of the African contribution to Afro-Brazilian music and culture. So there is Bahia. That's the place where I based my work, and this Bahia is known as the African Rome. Many people from Bahia have called it that, the African Rome, meaning that they feel that the extent to which African derived musics and dances and food and religions are still alive there is such that you may as well think that you are in Africa itself. Many people, when I was speaking with them in Bahia, they would tell me, I would ask him, for example, so what do you think about this process of re-Africanization of music here in Bahia, which is a term that some scholars have used? And so when I was a grad student, I went very happily asking about the re-Africanization. I got all these looks from people saying, what do you mean re-Africanization, my son? You're in Africa. Yeah? So that really, really struck me as a very, very important aspect of how to approach the study of Afro-Brazilian music in Brazil. So there is a map of Brazil. That's the state of Bahia. It's a state in the northeast of the country. There is the city, concentrates most of the population and where most of the black people are based in that state. And so that's zoom in there. So I did conduct research around places out of Salvador, but it was mostly in Salvador. The 4 orchestras that I studied for my book are headquartered in this space. So the perception of Africa being, of Bahia being a piece of Africa is so strong that in a part of the book I discussed this project called Africa Visits Africa, where a black activist from Brazil invited 2 Angolan musicians to visit Bahia in 2012. These 2 gentlemen, Dodo Miranda and Wiza Kenji, these 2 wonderful musicians. They came and they collaborated with local musicians, with one of the orchestras that was my case studies. And through their interactions, this question came of what do we make of this relationship between Angolan music and African and Bahian musics, and so this is what I wrote about that. The late Wiza Kenji, for instance, asserted that he felt at home in Bahia. So Kenji is one of those Angolan musicians. He felt at home in Bahia because Bahia is Africa, and went as far to say that in some regards Brazil preserves more African rituals than Africa itself. This affirmation of Bahia's Africanness by an African individual was music to Bahian ears. The news outlet that published Kenji's statement about Bahia's superior Africanness concluded, during the night of the concert, the Africa that both locales preserve will be mixed and will become one, complete, faithful, and original. This statement suggests that both Bahia and Angola preserve complementary aspects of an original Africa. Bahia has preserved Africa's most traditional and ritualistic aspects, and Angola the most modern ones. Bahia is thus presented as a hyper-real Africa, more real than the real Africa. So that this is not just people from Bahia being very proud of their, black people from Bahia saying, oh, this is really African soil here. This is Angolan musicians coming to Bahia and contributing to that discourse with their own rhetoric and sort of confirming that idea to Brazilians. Here are because Bahia has this place in the African diaspora, this privileged place in the African diaspora, this place of preservation and production of black culture. There's a lot of scholarship about it. So here are some books that have dealt with music and with other aspects of culture about Afro-Bahian music. So my book is part of that tradition. Okay, so I think we've made it through the most boring part. Now the least boring part. So I studied 4 orchestras for this book. The first is Orquestra Jumpilés, led by the late Lechieres Leche. That's I devoted 2 chapters to that orchestra because I have spent so much time with them. They were the sole case study for my dissertation, and I've been following them for 10 years. So I could have written the entire book about them. I just wanted to present other perspectives on other takes from Bahia on what is African about African music. So here is they're a big band. They're a big band, and interestingly, they have replaced in their format the rhythm section of piano, guitar, trap set, and bass guitar, and they have put instead a set of local Afro-Brazilian drums. Some of them are similar to the drums that you saw the first ensemble of Samba had here, but mostly they are drums from the candomblé Afro-religious tradition, which are held in Brazil, are perceived to be the ranked highest if we were to create a rank. They rank highest in terms of Africanness. So they have those drums there. Those are these beautiful drums held in those high stands. They are actually, this is an atabaque used in capoeira, so they're similar to these drums here, to this drum here. So let's listen to a little bit of their music here. It doesn't want to, or the sound doesn't come out. Maybe because this is some longer.
Well, in the meantime, I'll tell you about the other group. So there is the four groups. The second is the symphony orchestra, which may come as a surprise if you think about African.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
So let's show the.
For some reason it doesn't, it's not liking. So there's a symphony orchestra, and there are instruments building by this instrument here. As you saw, this is a building by, and this is the main instrument used in capoeira, signature instrument of capoeira. And more or less 35-40 years ago, capoeira practitioners started to use this instrument to form separate ensembles. They call it berimbau orchestras, orchestra de berimbau. And with those orchestras, they started to compose music specifically for them that is different to the music that is performed in capoeira. So I studied two of those orchestras that do very different kinds of things. So here's the symphony orchestra, Orchestra Afro-Sinfónica. Oh no. Oh well. Sadly, it's been hard to make it work with the sound. But the name of the here are the names of the groups: Orquestra Jumpilés, Orquestra Afro-Sinfónica, Obadeshis, and Orquestra Nzinga de Berimbau. So when you read the book, I know you will. I urge you to go and listen and watch. They have a large catalog of videos on YouTube, and you can also purchase their music, and you should. We all should. So these genres have in common. I chose, there are hundreds of different ensembles that I could have chosen for this project, and I decided to study genres that are hybrid, genres that do not sit squarely in what people consider to be Afro-Brazilian music. And that was a deliberate decision. When people are negotiating between tradition and innovation, they usually are more, they're more practiced in talking about these kinds of adaptations they make. And that was definitely my experience with these musicians here. They had wonderful conversations where they were trying to define, so this is what tradition is offering me, this is what the innovation that I'm making, and this is why this innovation, the most important part, why this innovation is within tradition, and we should call it Afro-Brazilian music. So I was very interested in that. They mixed two broad genres, one what I would call global genres, jazz and European classical music. And on the other hand, they used Afro-Brazilian genres such as capoeira, folk, samba, carnival samba, and especially candomblé music, the music, this worship music from Afro-Brazilian shrines. Now, I'll show you just a couple, very, very briefly, a couple of examples of the kinds of analysis that I did. And the things that people said to me and that I observed that guided me and that made me curious. So this first one, this is a picture of Lecheres Leche again, and this is what he had to say about rhythmicity. He said, yeah.
I think you turn up the share screen again. Try not to turn up the share screen.
Is that better? Thank you. It says, my intention is to create a type of music. This is why I asked him about his creative process. He says, my intention is to create a type of music where the resources of Afro-Brazilian music are mixed, where the complexity and organization which characterizes the rhythmic systems become clear. It is a work focused on and inspired by percussion and rhythmic and polyrhythmic, and the polyrhythmic and rhythmic universe of candomblé. So I have underlined a bunch of keywords here. The most important are perhaps rhythmic, complexity, and organization. So he claims that rhythmicity is one of the most is one of those essential aspects of African music. Rhythmicity, and the music needs to be rhythmically complex. And he claims that also that there is a structure. There is a structure. So I was very interested. We had many conversations about what that structure is. And so he's, in the surface, we could say, well, what this composer is doing is he's refining this trope. He's refining this stereotype. Music is African, African music is rhythmic. Well, this music is rhythmic. Now, what he does when we look at at his music, this is one of the little things. So I dove as deep as I could in the complexity of his music, and found that one of the things that he does is in his compositional process is to take inspiration in certain patterns that are used in these Afro-Brazilian religions and transform them in a way that they become more complex. They become more complex, more hard to grasp for listeners. He's deliberate in that. So he's saying, African music is rhythmically complex, and I will give you complex. Right? That's a blunt way to put it. So here is an example of that. So this is I want you to pay attention. This is a polyrhythmic ensemble in an actual candomblé ceremony. There are various drums and there's people singing and all that. So pay attention to the bell pattern. There's a bell pattern there. We can't hear it. Then I'll clap it for you. So the pattern goes like this. So that's a pattern that is I suppose I should be here for the people who are not here. In Brazil, that's called vasi. It's a very well-known pattern, very well-known, and is featured in many different grooves within candomblé. Like basically every person from Bahia will hear that pattern and they will know, oh, this is a candomblé pattern and it's played for such and such deity. So the people have that association. So what this composer did is he took this pattern and then he did something that I have called rotated it. So we have Sam here, who's a composer. That probably has a more specific name in music, in Western music theory. But what he did was basically take this pattern and shift the reference point. So that is this. If we start from the top, when it says basi, that's the original position of the pattern would feel like this. Now, for a couple of pieces, what he did is that he shifted the reference point. So from a piece called On Ha'auke, he shifted the beginning to that green dot that I have signaled there. So the pattern, which is the same set of durations, just starting at a different point, would feel like this. One. And yet for another piece, he started there. He started at this position here. So that would feel. Yeah. So he did these kinds of things, and then when what I found when I was speaking with, when first I felt that I'm very familiar with this pattern in this context, and when I listened to him, I was like, what is going on? What on earth is going on? What is this? Because I am so used to listen to this pattern in this form, and when the beginning is shifted, I want to hear it like this, but the music is telling me otherwise. So I went more or less, I explained this in detail in the book, and explained how he's doing this and another 50 different kinds of things to deliberately complicate rhythm, to make the larger point that music, that Afro-Brazilian music is rhythmically complex, refined, reinforcing the essentialism, this stereotype. I wish we could listen to the example, but we can't. Okay. Another example of what he does is really, this is a very, very interesting case. There's a pattern, I have actually an instrument here that I can use. There's a pattern called Ijexá. It's another pattern that in Brazil is, every person would listen and say, oh, that's Ijexá, that's the groove of Oxum, this the goddess of water and beauty, dressed in yellow and held to be this beautiful, like this signifier of beauty. And the pattern goes like this. Right? That's the pattern, and it's very. Every person who listens to that will say, "Oh, Oxum," and they will dance like Oxum. It's something that has been even secularized. Some carnival ensembles have arranged this groove for carnival for like since 1948, more or less. So people are very familiar with this. It appears in popular music all over. But what Leche did, the conductor of Percussiveness, is he took that pattern and he actually truncated it. So it sounds like this. So if I do my so it's a cycle of 7 subdivisions, and it's the same pattern, but it's the same. You can recognize, oh, this is the same pattern, but it's like ending before where it's supposed to end. So that throws off everyone. So when people start to dance, what happened? So that's another technique. So he did that a lot. Cut these patterns, expanded them, rotated them. Sometimes all those things at the same time. So it was really, really a wonderful journey trying to figure out the actual things that this musician was doing with the music to sort of perform this African rhythmicity. Now I'm going to contrast that, and I promise this is the last example, with one example by another orchestra. This is a berimbau orchestra of this young man called Daeño Shekere. So what he did is he took the berimbaus and he tuned them, which is something that is not really done in capoeira. Berimbaus are not tuned deliberately to create melodies or harmonies, although they create pitches. They can be tuned, but capoeiristas treat the instrument more or less as a percussion instrument. So what this fellow did is he took a set of berimbaus, he tuned them, and he created the pitch collection of a particular scale. So, for example, one of the berimbaus is going to play C and D, another one plays E and F, and you play G and A, and so on. And then we can create a melody by interlocking, collaborating. So that's the premise behind that. And I found that fascinating. It's I think it was the only group that was doing that in Salvador. And they also have a very strong Africanist discourse. It's like, this is Africa. And our point is very different to the point that Leche was making. So he would say, in the same way that people imagine Africa as a small country full of poor and naked people, they also believe that African music is only drums and rhythm. We want to dispel the myth by showing the connections between the rhythmic, melodic, and harmonic aspects of African music. So he's basically saying our music can also be melodic, can also be harmonic. So I'm going to give you melody and harmony, and I'm going to remain grounded in African aesthetics because I'm using an instrument that came from Africa. I'm just tuning it. And interestingly, these are the kinds of pieces they play. I wish we could hear that. We can't. But that's the la 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 la. So they play that. They play pieces from the European canon. They also play the Brazilian national anthem. They play pieces that, and they also play popular pieces, but they play these pieces that are perceived in Brazil to belong to this erudite world, to the world of classical music, to this high culture world, and also to place African Brazilian traditions within that world that is perceived to be superior, to be high, of a high culture. So this is a different way of performing Africanness. It's the opposite way of the previous one, if we look at how they perform the idea of rhythmicity. So I document in the book dozens of cases where people take, this is just rhythmicity, but remember there is percussiveness, there is spirituality, embodiment, spontaneity, and so on. So people take these notions and sometimes they emphasize them, sometimes they do not. Sometimes they talk about them so ardently, sometimes they disregard them. But they are always at the center of the discussion. That's why I decided in my analysis to center them in my analysis. So here are some of the conclusions that I share with you. These tropes of Africanness are strategically emphasized, but they can also be downplayed, ignored, or traded. Africanness is emergent and contingent, but not separated from the trajectory of Africans in the diaspora. There is a strategic use of the popular and erudite binary, and this is one of the main points that I wanted to make in the conclusion is that is inviting scholars to embrace the study of essentialism, to center them in their analysis, because we have, through decades of these studies of deconstruction, of social constructivism, we have essentialisms have been demonized, so to speak, in academic studies, seen as these reductions, these stereotypes that we should just put them aside. But I'm inviting people to bring them to the table and study them because they are so important for practitioners. So we better embrace them, and by doing that, we can understand why we find genres like this, Afro-punk and Afro-baroque and all the Afro-futuristic genres, etc. So I'll stop that. I have said so much, so thank you very much. I think I have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Juan Diego. I'm so sorry that we didn't get all the sound.
That's okay.
I was wondering, as I was reading your book, it would have been lovely to have a CD accompanying your book. So maybe you could say a little bit about where we can find some of this music to hear it ourselves while we're reading the book. And then I'll open it out for questions to everyone.
That's very, very important. Thank you. So, in most of the cases, when I refer to specific videos that I analyze, I actually give I give the references to the links that you can go and visit. And I'm aware that many of those may not exist anymore because they changed. But if you Google if you go to YouTube, for example, and type in the search box the name of a piece and the name of the group, you will find various performances. The albums that these groups have released can be purchased on iTunes, and they're also, I think they have also uploaded them to YouTube as audio files as well. So that's definitely a very important part of reading the book, to watch these videos and listen to the music along with it. So, do we have time for some questions?
We do. Let me just remind you that we have the books on sale here, and there's also a raffle of the book as well. So let's take about 5-7 minutes or so questions. Just raise your hand. First time we come to you.
Dan?
Hi. I wanted to go back to Oh, thank you. Hello. I wanted to ask about the transcription of the Bernbau, the Bolero. Was that your transcription, or were they looking off of that music? And if so, can you talk a little bit about what a rehearsal might have been like?
What's the last part of the question?
What maybe if you could talk a little bit about what the rehearsal process was like?
Yeah. I love those kinds of questions because I have a lot to say about them. So, and that was my transcription. So let me
pull it out here. So, there.
So that's my transcription. That's my transcription. They had a single melodic line. That's what they were used for practice and memorization. And then, so what musicians would do, they would take this. I can't show it. But they would have the single melodic line, and what they would do is each person will make a mark in the notes, in the 2 notes that we're going to play, because you see that each person is playing 1 or 2 notes there. So they will know what their part is. It is a lot easier also to play this kind of music if you have the entire line. So because you don't have to be just counting and clapping to know exactly where you come. But if you're listening to the entire melody and you know what your notes are, is easier. I created this score just to show the reader really how all these parts are separate. So I actually, in the book, there's I presented the actual score, a picture of the score that they use. So you can find it I think it's chapter 7. Rehearsal. They rehearse with a score. And each person will have their own score, and then the director, Daeño Shekere, is giving instructions, and I as a true ethnographer, took one of the parts and tried to play it myself just to check how difficult or not it is, and it's actually quite difficult. Even if you know the melody already, knowing exactly where it comes, because it is just knowing exactly that are those two notes and not the two notes before or after can be difficult at the beginning. But they rehearse like any group. They meet once a week, and then they go over the pieces, and then they distribute things, and then the director, they don't have I observed, like 3 months of rehearsals every week, and they didn't really have like a special kind of routine to deal with these interlocking patterns, but yeah, just a lot of repetition, and the director say, no, it's not flowing, so your note, you came late, that kind of thing. Yeah. Any other questions? Zoila.
A quick follow-up comment on Kimberly's suggestion. Have you thought maybe, well, the book is already published, but a companion website can be useful. That's what I did with my second book. It just, something, right. But I did it before it was published, so it was already printed in the book. Just, like you said, the links change and all that, but you have to kind of keep them up. But if you have the actual recordings there, it facilitates. And also, you can do it bilingual, and this is my question. Any plans for translating into Portuguese? How are you going to try to share this with the people you work with? And in that sense, maybe you can work towards a website that is bilingual and that has this material together. Yeah.
So you absolutely, Zoila, and you answered my question yourself. So I am currently working on translating the book. We have a wonderful alumni at the department who is from Brazil, who's agreed to translate the book, Andressa Gonçalves, and so we're working on that. But that's a great. I had not thought about the website. That's a great suggestion for that, for the Portuguese version of the book. Yeah.
And you today can also my book website is hosted by Peace.
Oh, okay.
So you have that support. You don't have to pay for that site.
Oh. I'm going to take you for coffee. I'm going to take you for coffee, definitely. Great. Thank you, Zoila. That's very useful. Yeah.
Any other questions? Tom?
Thank you, Juan Diego. I definitely love learning so much about this stuff I know nothing about. And so I had a question. So we kind of started about, that so many of the inhabitants of now Brazil and Baja have been there for centuries. Why do they not claim like a nationality or an identity that is not African, that is like, for lack of a better word, indigenous? They're not, they have occupied territory in this space for so long that they still feel connected or want to feel a connection.
That's a wonderful and very big question. I don't presume to know the answer to that, Tom. But some of the things I've heard and I have read in the scholarship are that, through the experience of enslavement and the marginalization that followed that and that persists, people don't feel that they have been able to properly integrate into society. They're not part of a society that wants them to be there. And that, I'm not just speaking about Brazil, sadly. So many people many black people see Africa as Wakanda, no? As this place, this imagined magical place where if we went there, we could
express ourselves properly, we wouldn't be discriminated against in the way, at least in the ways we are here. And that is, at least in people's minds, that's powerful. That's very powerful. And I'm sure there's a lot more to say about that. But there's a whole. I discussed that a little bit in the historical background of the book. A whole part about the Back to Africa movement that was started actually by abolitionists in various parts of the Americas. But that was problematic in many ways, because there was one solution of, okay, you're free, but just go back to your home and leave us here alone. But there were many people in Brazil, at least, that saw Africa as this place where we could go and restart our lives. And that's actually one of the projects that I'm working on these communities, that once they gained freedom in Brazil, at the beginning of the 19th century, they went back to Brazil, to West Africa, and form these communities, and they still feel that they're Brazilian. They feel that they're Brazilian. So this is not a phenomenon of, people who come from Africa and feel that Africa is their motherland. Many Africans who were taken to Brazil and eventually gaining freedom and going back to Africa, today their descendants say, we're Brazilians. They don't speak Portuguese, they've never been in Brazil. In the same way that many African Americans and Afro-Brazilians have never been into Africa, they don't speak a single African language, at least African indigenous language, know very little about the history and politics and culture from Africa, but they feel that this is my people, this is my ancestry, and I should honor that, and that is important. So that's part of that essentialization, I think, that empowers people. The last thing I will say is the trope of ancestry is very important, very important. I didn't include it in those 6. I chose those 6 arbitrarily, but also based on my conversations with people. These are the tropes that came up more frequently when I spoke with musicians. That's why I chose them. But there are many others. And one of them is this idea that African culture has this reverence for the ancestors, right? And I think that is part of it, that many people feel that they need to reconnect with this past, and the past should go back all the way to Africa. And furthermore, it helps African people African descendants from different places in the diaspora to connect to each other, to feel affinity. An African American to feel affinity with a person from Jamaica, from a black person from Trinidad, from Colombia, from Brazil, because we all share this past experience, and we came from the same continent. Therefore, our fight, our struggles are similar, and we should show solidarity for each other, form a stronger community. So it's very complex, and I am sure many people will have a lot of more things to say about that. Thank you.
Juan Diego, this was fascinating. I have so many questions about this idea, this essentialness, and the anti-essentialness that I'm sure we're going to have many conversations about as we move forward. I want to thank everybody for attending today. And like I said, there's a book available that we're raffling off. And so if you look under your seat or a seat adjacent to you, and you have something that looks like this under it, you might have to get up and look under the seat. I promise you, it's here somewhere. Woohoo! Here you go. You're welcome. Juan Diego, are you available to sign this book and any others that people purchase? There are books back here to purchase. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's give Professor Diaz a round of applause for his beautiful work.
Thank you all. And I think there might